The room was bathed in a faint golden glow, the flickering light of a single candle sending shadows waltzing across the time-worn wooden walls. His eyes locked with mine, and for a heartbeat, the world stood still. My pulse quickened as his hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch, accidental, yet electrifying. The air between us grew dense, laden with an unspoken intensity neither of us dared to name. His voice, usually calm and resolute, was now barely a whisper. "Emily, we can't," he murmured. But he made no move to leave. Nor did I. My heart thundered in my chest, its rhythm drowning out the faint notes of the organ rehearsal echoing from the chapel. I leaned forward, drawn to him by an invisible force, as if every sacred promise I had ever made warred against the undeniable truth before me. I wanted him, and I knew he wanted me too. I know you're on the edge of your seat, eager to know what happened next in that secluded, dimly lit room behind the chapel. But hold on, dear listener. Before we delve deeper into the forbidden, let me take you back to where it all began. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more twists and turns in this tale. Now let me tell you how it started. It was my first year as a postulant, freshly initiated, and still finding my place in the serene life of St. Augustine's Parish. Nestled in a sleepy town surrounded by rolling meadows and rustling oaks, the parish seemed timeless, its rhythm marked by the melodic tolling of the chapel bells. Father James had arrived just a few months before me. He was unlike any priest I had ever encountered, tall, with an inviting smile, and a voice that could calm even the most anxious heart. Every room seemed to brighten with his presence, and the congregation adored him. Even the sisters held him in quiet regard, though none would dare voice it. I first took note of him during a reflective discussion after evening prayers. His way of speaking made you feel seen, as though every word was created solely for you. That night, he asked us to contemplate the essence of sacrifice. When I shared my thoughts, his gaze lingered on me just a moment too long, leaving an impression that refused to fade. Our paths began crossing more frequently after that. At first, it was nothing unusual. Shared duties, brief exchanges, innocuous moments that felt too mundane to question. But then came the lingering looks, the slight pauses before he spoke my name, the quiet signs that hung in the spaces between our words. One evening, after a community gathering, he stopped me in the dimly lit corridor. "Sister Emily," he said, his voice low and warm. "Thank you for your reflections tonight. You have a way of cutting straight to the heart of things." I smiled, flustered by the unexpected compliment. "Thank you, Father. I only speak what's in my heart." He nodded, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer. "And it shows," he said softly, before walking away. I stood rooted to the spot, my mind spinning, the air around me suddenly heavy. It was a small moment, but it planted a seed of something I couldn't name, something that began to grow in the quiet corners of my heart. In the days that followed, I found myself noticing Father James in ways I hadn't before. His laughter, rich and genuine, lingered in the air, like a hymn. The way he listened when someone spoke, his eyes fixed intently on theirs, made you feel as though you were the only person in the room. But it wasn't just his charm that drew me. Beneath the confident exterior, I glimpsed a man carrying the weight of his role, the isolation that came with the collar. One evening, after the others had retired early, I found him sitting on a weathered bench in the rectory garden, gazing at the stars. The stillness of the moment compelled me to join him. "Do you ever wonder," he began, his voice scarcely more than a whisper, "if you made the right choice?" I hesitated. "What do you mean?" He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "This life we've chosen, it's beautiful, yes, but don't you ever feel like something's missing?" I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I think everyone has moments of doubt. But isn't that what faith is for? To guide us through?" He nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. But faith doesn't always quiet the ache." His honesty left me unmoored. The raw vulnerability in his voice, mirroring an ache I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. From that night, things began to change. The late-night conversations became more frequent. The silences between us heavier, charged with an unspoken longing that neither of us dared name. Night conversations began first in the garden, then in the library, where the shadows seemed to wrap around us like a cloak of secrecy. We talked about everything: faith, love, sacrifice, and the things we had given up to be where we were. It was during one of those talks that he shared something that stayed with me. "There was someone," he said, his voice heavy with memory. "Before I took my vows, I thought I loved her, but I chose this life instead." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. My silence must have encouraged him, because he continued. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd chosen differently, if I'd allowed myself to love freely without the weight of these boundaries." His words struck a chord deep within me. I too had given up love, or what I thought was love for the calling. But hearing him speak so openly about it stirred something I wasn't ready to name. The next day, I found myself looking for him more often. A glance across the room, a fleeting smile during choir practice. Each time our eyes met, it felt like a secret passed between us. The first real test of my resolve came during a rainy evening. A storm had knocked out the power, plunging the parish into darkness. Father James and I were tasked with checking the candles in the sanctuary. We moved through the silent church, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. At one point, he handed me a candle, and our fingers brushed. It was the smallest of touches, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "You're cold," he said, his voice soft. "It's just the rain," I lied, avoiding his gaze. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "Emily." It was the first time he had ever said my name without the sister attached. The sound of it, so intimate, made my heart race. I didn't move, didn't breathe. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had narrowed down to just the two of us standing there in the glow of a single candle. But then, just as quickly as it began, he stepped back. "We should finish," he said, his voice tight. I nodded, my hands trembling as I lit the last candle. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had said my name, the way his hand had lingered just a second too long. Something had shifted between us, and I knew there was no going back. The storm seemed to mark the beginning of a new chapter, one where silence spoke louder than words, and every glance, every fleeting touch carried a weight neither of us dared acknowledge. Yet, despite our best efforts to maintain distance, life in the parish kept drawing us together. The breaking point came during a retreat, organized for the youth in the diocese. Father James and I were assigned to lead the planning committee, which meant long hours in the small conference room, poring over schedules, preparing materials, and managing the endless logistics. It started innocently enough. We worked efficiently side by side, exchanging ideas and the occasional joke to lighten the mood. But as the days went on, the boundaries between us began to blur. We would stay late, long after the others had gone, talking about everything and nothing. I caught myself lingering when he laughed, marveling at how the sound seemed to fill the room. One evening, the committee meeting ran late, and by the time we finished, the others had already left. I was gathering my things when I realized he was watching me. "You're always the last to leave," he said, his tone light but his eyes serious. I shrugged, trying to mask my nervousness. "Someone has to make sure everything's in order." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You carry so much on your shoulders, Emily. Have you ever thought about letting someone share the weight?" The way he said my name made my heart skip a beat. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, I found myself holding his gaze, the air between us thick with unspoken emotions. "James," I whispered, his name slipping out before I could stop myself. That single word seemed to break whatever restraint he had left. He closed the distance between us in 2 steps, his hand brushing my cheek, tentative and unsure. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice trembling. I couldn't, or maybe I didn't want to. My silence was all the permission he needed. The kiss was gentle at first, a hesitant exploration that quickly deepened as months of suppressed longing spilled over. His hands tangled in my hair, and I clung to him as if letting go would shatter me. But then reality came crashing down. I pulled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "We can't," I said, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. "I know," he replied, his forehead resting against mine, "but I don't think I can stay away from you anymore." I wanted to tell him he had to, that we both did. But in that moment, all I could think about was how right it felt to be in his arms. How for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. That night, I lay awake, torn between the vows I had taken, and the undeniable pull I felt toward him. I prayed for guidance, for strength, for clarity. But all I could see when I closed my eyes was his face. All I could hear was the sound of his voice whispering my name. The next day, we avoided each other, the tension between us palpable. But fate, or perhaps something more sinister, seemed determined to test us. A week later, we were tasked with delivering supplies to a remote village on the outskirts of the parish. The trip required an overnight stay, as the journey was too long to complete in one day. The guest house provided for us was simple, with 2 small rooms separated by a thin wooden door. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear him moving on the other side, the sound of his footsteps pacing back and forth. I wanted to knock, to ask him what he was thinking, but I didn't have the courage. It was past midnight when I heard the soft knock on my door. My heart raced as I sat up, the covers clutched tightly around me. "Who is it?" I whispered, though I already knew. "It's me," came his quiet reply. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Every instinct told me to turn him away, to send him back to his room. But when I opened the door and saw the look in his eyes, a mixture of longing and torment, I couldn't bring myself to say no. Neither of us spoke as he stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged, until he finally broke it. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I couldn't be alone tonight." I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, and I sat beside him, the distance between us feeling both vast and non-existent. When he looked at me, there was no turning back. His hand reached for mine, and in that moment, every vow, every promise, every prayer, faded into the background. All that mattered was the man sitting beside me, the way his touch made me feel alive. What happened next, I can't bring myself to describe, not yet. All I can say is that it was both the most beautiful and the most devastating moment of my life. For in giving into the temptation we had fought so hard to resist, we had crossed a line we could never uncross. The morning after was suffocating. The pale sunlight seeped through the thin curtains of the guest house, casting an unforgiving light on what we had done. I woke up before he did, my heart pounding as I watched his steady breathing. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to think it was a dream, but the warmth of his body beside me shattered that illusion. I slipped out of the bed, the cold wooden floor biting against my bare feet. My mind was a whirlwind of guilt, shame, and confusion. How could I face him? How could I face myself? I dressed quickly, my hands trembling, and escaped into the crisp morning air. The village was still asleep, the only sounds the distant crow of a rooster, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. I wandered aimlessly, my prayers feeling hollow, as I begged for forgiveness. But even as I asked for penance, I couldn't ignore the memory of his touch, the way he had made me feel alive in a way I never thought possible. When I returned to the guest house, he was waiting for me, his face pale and drawn. "Emily," he began, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Don't," I said, my voice breaking. "We can't talk about this." He stepped closer, his eyes filled with regret. "We have to. What happened last night was a mistake." "It was a mistake," I interrupted, though the words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. He flinched as if I had slapped him. "Do you really believe that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the truth was, I didn't know what to believe anymore. The drive back to the parish was a silent one, the tension between us thick and oppressive. When we arrived, we went our separate ways, avoiding each other at every opportunity. But no amount of distance could erase what had happened, nor could it silence the longing that continued to grow inside me. Days turned into weeks, and though we tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, the cracks began to show. Sisters noticed my distracted demeanor, the way I seemed to drift through my duties. Father James wasn't himself either. His once easy smile was strained, his sermons lacking their usual passion. Then came the charity project. It was supposed to be a simple initiative, distributing food and supplies to the homeless in the city. But the close proximity reignited everything we had tried so hard to suppress. Every shared glance, every accidental touch felt like fire on my skin. One evening, after a long day of work, we found ourselves alone in the storage room. I was organizing supplies when he walked in, his presence filling the small space. "Emily," he said, his voice strained. "We need to talk." I kept my back to him, my hands shaking as I stacked a box on the shelf. "There's nothing to say." "Yes, there is," he insisted, stepping closer. "I can't keep pretending that what happened between us didn't mean anything." I spun around, my emotions boiling over. Of course it meant something. But it was wrong, James. We took vows, sacred vows, and we broke them. He reached for me, his touch gentle but insistent. "And yet here we are. Tell me you don't feel it, that pull between us. Tell me it doesn't consume you the way it consumes me." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I shook my head. "It doesn't matter what I feel. We have a duty to God, to the church." "And what about to ourselves?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Do we not owe ourselves the truth?" The truth. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. The truth was that I loved him. I had fought it, denied it, buried it. But there it was, staring me in the face. Before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us, my hands clutching the front of his robe as I pulled him into a kiss. It was desperate, raw, and filled with all the emotions we had tried so hard to suppress. But as our lips parted, reality came crashing down once more. I pulled away, my chest heaving. "This has to stop," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He nodded slowly, his expression one of resignation and sorrow. "I know." That night, I knelt in the chapel, the weight of my sins crushing me. I prayed for forgiveness, for strength, for the ability to do what was right. But deep down, I knew the battle was far from over. For no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop myself from wanting him. And that want, that forbidden desire, was a cross I would have to bear. The days that followed were a blur of whispered prayers and sleepless nights. Father James and I avoided each other as best we could, but the tension between us was palpable, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. I felt the weight of every glance, every moment of silence that lingered too long. The whispers among the sisters began to grow louder. I caught fragments of their conversations in the hallways and during meals. They spoke of changes in Father James, of my distracted demeanor. The parishioners, too, began to notice. There were questions, subtle but persistent, about the strain that had crept into our once peaceful lives at St. Augustine's. It was only a matter of time before the walls closed in. One evening, after Vespers, I retreated to the garden, seeking solace in the cool night air. The stars shimmered faintly above, their light veiled by the restless clouds. I knelt by the stone bench, my hands clasped tightly in prayer, when I heard footsteps behind me. "Emily." His voice broke the quiet, soft but insistent. I rose to my feet, my heart pounding. "James, you shouldn't be here." "I couldn't stay away," he confessed, his voice raw with emotion. "I've tried, Emily, but it's impossible. Every day I see you, and every day I feel it growing stronger." I turned away, tears stinging my eyes. "Don't do this. We're already walking a dangerous path. This has to end." He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence a painful contrast to the chill in the air. "And yet, here we are. Tell me, Emily, does your heart not ache as mine does? Do you not feel as though we are destined to collide, no matter how hard we fight?" "Destiny?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "What kind of destiny tears apart everything we've dedicated our lives to?" He reached for my hand, his touch both soothing and tormenting. "Perhaps it's a test, one that we've both failed. But denying what we feel, does that make us any more righteous?" I pulled away, my voice trembling. "It makes us faithful. It makes us strong." "Does it?" he asked, his tone quiet but resolute. "Or does it make us cowards?" His words struck deep, unraveling the fragile resolve I had clung to. In that moment, I felt as though I were standing on the edge of an abyss, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. My silence was all the answer he needed. "Emily," he whispered, stepping closer, his breath warm against my cheek. "I love you. I have tried to fight it, to bury it, but it consumes me. Tell me you don't feel the same." I looked up at him, my heart breaking under the weight of his words. The truth was written all over my face, in every tear that slipped down my cheek. But still, I couldn't speak it aloud. To do so would be to surrender completely. "James," I managed, my voice barely audible. We can't do this." He nodded, his shoulders sagging under the weight of my rejection. "I know." And yet, as we stood there under the darkened sky, the distance between us seemed insurmountable and impossibly close all at once. The battle within me raged on, and I knew no matter how hard I tried to resist, this was far from over. But to ourselves? To the church? The thought of confessing our sins to the church filled me with dread. The scandal, the shame, it would destroy everything we had worked for, everything we had dedicated our lives to. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps we needed to be broken in order to be rebuilt. That night we made a pact. Together, we would go to the bishop and confess everything. It was a terrifying prospect. But it was the only way we could begin to make amends for ourselves, for the people we had hurt, and for the vows we had betrayed. The days leading up to our confession were agonizing. The whispers grew louder, the stares more pointed. By the time we stood before the bishop, I felt as though the weight of the world was on my shoulders. We told him everything. The meetings, the touches, the moments we crossed the line. I expected anger, condemnation, perhaps even excommunication. But what I saw in his eyes was something far more piercing. Disappointment. "I trusted you both," he said, his voice heavy. "The church trusted you. But you have betrayed not only your vows, but the faith of the people who look to you for guidance." Tears streamed down my face as I bowed my head, unable to meet his gaze. Father James stood beside me, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. The bishop's punishment was severe, but merciful. We were both removed from our positions and sent to separate monasteries for a period of penance and reflection. It was a sentence that felt both like a death and a chance at redemption. As I packed my belongings and prepared to leave the parish, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. I had loved Father James, and a part of me always would, but perhaps true love meant letting go. For his sake, for mine, and for the vows we had once held sacred. In the quiet solitude of the monastery, I found a strange kind of peace. The days were long and grueling, filled with prayer, work, and introspection. I came to understand that forgiveness wasn't something you earned. It was something you choose to accept. As for Father James, I don't know where his path led. Perhaps one day our paths will cross again, and we'll find the closure we couldn't give each other. Or perhaps our story ends here, with two broken souls trying to piece themselves back together. All I know is that, despite everything, I will always remember him not as a temptation or a sin, but as a man who taught me the complexity of love, faith, and redemption. And for that, I will always be grateful.